On the evening of May 3, 2007, the coastal town of Praia da Luz in Portugal was calm, quiet, and bathed in warm light as tourists enjoyed the spring holiday season. Nestled along the Algarve coast, this sleepy resort was known for its picturesque beaches and laid-back charm. But by the next morning, it would become the epicenter of a media whirlwind that would last for more than a decade. At the heart of it all was 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, a British toddler whose sudden disappearance from her family's holiday apartment would shock the world and ignite one of the most high-profile missing person cases in modern history. That Thursday night, Jerry and Kate McCann, both physicians from Leicestershire, UK, were vacationing with friends and their young children. The group, later dubbed the Tapas 7 by the press, had developed a routine: dinner at a nearby restaurant while the children slept in their respective holiday apartments just a short walk away. The McCanns reportedly checked on their children in shifts, but sometime between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., Madeleine vanished from her bed in apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort. The window was open, the shutters raised, and Madeleine's twin siblings, Sean and Amelie, slept undisturbed nearby. But Madeleine was gone. Within hours, panic spread through the resort. Staff and guests searched the grounds, combing beaches and alleyways by flashlight. Local police arrived shortly after the alarm was raised, and by the next morning, posters bearing Madeleine's wide-eyed photo began appearing on lampposts and shop doors. But it was only the beginning. The case quickly escalated beyond a local investigation. The British media seized on the story, framing it not just as a missing child case, but as a crisis that could happen to any family, anywhere. Headlines screamed across front pages in bold type, TV reporters gathered outside the Ocean Club, and satellite vans parked along the narrow streets of Praia da Luz. Madeleine's photo, taken just days before the disappearance, became iconic almost overnight. Her round face, distinctive eye defect, a coloboma in her right iris, and innocent expression burned into the public consciousness. Celebrities joined the campaign. David Beckham and J.K. Rowling issued public appeals. The Pope met with the McCanns and prayed for Madeleine's safe return. British police dispatched officers to assist the Portuguese investigation, while Interpol issued alerts across Europe. For a brief moment, the world united in horror and hope. But beneath the surface of international sympathy, cracks in the investigation began to show. From the outset, tensions arose between Portuguese authorities and British law enforcement. The Portuguese police, or Polícia Judiciária, were unaccustomed to the level of public scrutiny that suddenly engulfed them. They faced accusations of being unprepared for a case of this magnitude. Early mistakes, such as failing to properly secure the crime scene, not sealing off the apartment, and allowing numerous people to enter and leave, would later haunt the investigation. Forensic evidence was limited, and any traces left behind were quickly compromised. Meanwhile, public interest surged to an unprecedented level. Tabloids published theories daily, some grounded in speculation, others fueled by anonymous sources. The McCanns established a website, findmadeleine.com, to gather donations and tips. A reward fund quickly grew, eventually exceeding £2.5 million. The case dominated news cycles for months, then years. But despite the media attention and massive public engagement, no breakthrough came. A key turning point arrived in the summer of 2007, when the McCanns appeared in a televised appeal on Portuguese TV, pleading for information. Their poise and composure drew praise from some, but suspicion from others. Whispers began to circulate. Were they too calm? Too rehearsed? Too media-savvy? In a grim twist, that same visibility that had made them the faces of a global search effort also placed them under an intense magnifying glass. Questions that might have once seemed unthinkable were now headline fodder. By August, over 100 days after Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese police shifted their strategy. Rather than focusing exclusively on the possibility of abduction, they began exploring alternative theories, including the possibility of accidental death and a cover-up. The tide was beginning to turn, but the full impact of that shift would only become clear in the weeks that followed. Back in the UK, the public remained riveted. Updates from Portugal were reported in real time, and every new detail, no matter how small, was dissected by pundits and amateur sleuths alike. Social media, still in its early days, buzzed with theories and accusations. Madeleine McCann had become more than a missing child, she had become a global obsession. A symbol. A mystery with no satisfying answer. The pain of the McCann family, meanwhile, became increasingly visible. Their every movement, gesture, and word was captured by cameras. They traveled between Portugal and the UK, managing media attention while enduring unimaginable grief. In the public eye, they were both victims and, soon, controversially, subjects of suspicion. The story was no longer just about a child gone missing. It was becoming something darker, a case tangled in politics, media pressure, and emotional extremes. As summer turned to fall in 2007, the McCann case was on the verge of exploding into an even more complex and polarizing saga. The world had watched the disappearance unfold in real time, but the true storm was just beginning. As the summer of 2007 deepened, so did the cracks in the case that had captivated the globe. With no confirmed sightings of Madeleine McCann, no forensic breakthroughs, and a growing sense of urgency, the tone of the investigation began to change. What began as a desperate search for a missing child was now morphing into a far more complicated and controversial criminal inquiry. At the heart of this evolution were two people who had once been seen as grieving parents, but who now found themselves on the receiving end of a brutal and public backlash. By September, for months after Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese authorities made a stunning move. Both Jerry and Kate McCann were officially declared arguidos, formal suspects under Portuguese law. The announcement sent shockwaves through the media and public. Speculation surged. Had investigators uncovered new evidence? Was there reason to believe the parents were hiding something? Or was this a desperate shift in strategy after months of failed leads and mounting pressure from both the Portuguese public and British press? Portuguese police claimed to have detected traces of blood and the scent of human decomposition in the rental car the McCanns had used weeks after Madeleine went missing, findings allegedly made by British sniffer dogs brought in to assist. However, this evidence was highly contested. Forensic analysis offered no conclusive proof, and critics argued that such biological traces could have come from any number of sources unrelated to foul play. Still, the damage was done. The court of public opinion began to shift, and the once sympathetic media narrative grew more skeptical, even accusatory. Fueling this transformation was a media ecosystem running at full throttle. British tabloids, known for their sensational headlines, printed story after story speculating on the McCanns' involvement. One day they were victims, the next they were suspects. Portuguese outlets followed suit, some going so far as to publish unverified leaks from inside the police investigation. The result was a media storm that bordered on hysteria. Reporters staked out the McCanns' every move, while pundits debated their parenting choices, body language, and perceived inconsistencies. Amid this chaos, the McCanns maintained their innocence and continued to insist that Madeleine had been abducted. They hired private investigators, launched appeals, and kept Madeleine's image in the public eye. Yet no matter what they did, the narrative seemed to spiral further out of their control. Their composure, once admired, was now criticized as cold or calculated. Their media strategy, which had initially served to raise awareness, was reframed as manipulative. In the eyes of many, they had become as much a part of the story as the child they were trying to find. Behind the scenes, tensions between British and Portuguese authorities reached a boiling point. Differences in investigative style, legal protocol, and media handling created a fractured effort. The Portuguese police, increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress and public criticism, began leaking details to the press, while British officials attempted to protect the McCanns' reputation. The result was a toxic brew of miscommunication and mistrust, with Madeleine's fate still a mystery. In October 2007, the McCanns returned to the UK, no longer simply grieving parents, but controversial figures at the centre of an international scandal. They remained arguidos, though no formal charges were ever brought. In the months that followed, the media continued to dissect every aspect of their lives. Their parenting choices were questioned. Why had they left their children alone? Why didn't they hire a babysitter? While online forums exploded with theories ranging from the plausible to the outrageous. In the absence of solid evidence, the vacuum was filled with conjecture. Psychics offered their services. Criminal profilers weighed in. Armchair detectives from around the globe pored over every photo, every timeline, every press conference. The case, already tragic, became surreal. Conspiracy theories flourished, involving everything from organ trafficking rings to government cover-ups, and were often fueled by the relentless 24-hour news cycle desperate for new angles. Yet even as scrutiny intensified, the McCanns pressed on with their campaign. They established Madeleine's Fund, a financial resource to support the search for their daughter and fund private investigative efforts. Millions of pounds were raised, some through donations, others via high-profile events and auctions. The couple also embarked on international trips to meet with officials, raise awareness, and keep Madeleine's face in the public eye. In July 2008, after a year of mounting public pressure and dwindling progress, Portuguese authorities officially dropped the arguido status from both parents and closed the case due to lack of evidence. But by that point, the damage, both reputational and investigative, had been done. Key moments had been lost. Potential leads had gone cold. The original crime scene had been compromised. And perhaps most importantly, the case had become so wrapped in noise, misinformation, and media spectacle that clarity seemed nearly impossible. Despite being cleared of any formal suspicion, the McCanns' name remained synonymous with mystery. For many, they were still the grieving parents of a missing girl. For others, they were the center of a puzzle that refused to make sense. The truth, whatever it was, remained elusive, buried beneath years of speculation, error, and emotional fatigue. As the years passed, and the headlines slowly faded, the McCanns continued their search. But they were no longer alone in carrying the burden of the case. By now, Madeleine McCann had become a symbol of lost innocence, of flawed justice systems, and of a media culture that could elevate, destroy, and reshape a narrative in real time. And though the noise had quieted, the story was far from over. As the second anniversary of Madeleine McCann's disappearance approached, the global spotlight had dimmed, but it had not disappeared. The Portuguese police had closed the official investigation in July 2008, citing insufficient evidence, but the story was far from over. For Kate and Gerry McCann, life had been irreversibly altered. They weren't just the parents of a missing child anymore. They were public figures, advocates, and the focal point of one of the most polarizing investigations in modern memory. But with the formal case shelved, they turned their attention to keeping the search alive, on their own terms. Private investigators funded by Madeleine's fund worked behind the scenes, following up on thousands of tips and leads. Some were wild goose chases, others showed fleeting promise but ended in dead ends. In 2011, after years of mounting political and public pressure, the UK's Metropolitan Police launched a new initiative, Operation Grange. Its purpose was to conduct a review of the original investigation, to analyse what had gone wrong and whether anything had been missed. With renewed resources and international cooperation, there was cautious hope that new eyes might find new answers. The Operation Grange team combed through over 40,000 documents. Detectives identified over 600 individuals of interest and investigated multiple persons of significance, yet years passed with no arrests, no suspects charged, and, most crucially, no sign of Madeleine. Leads were pursued in Germany, Morocco, Spain, and even Australia, but every potential breakthrough dissolved before it reached a courtroom. Madeleine's case had now spanned more than a dozen years, involved law enforcement agencies in over 20 countries, and consumed tens of millions in investigative resources. Still, there was no resolution. Then, in June 2020, a new suspect emerged, a convicted sex offender named Christian Brueckner, a German drifter with a history of child abuse and rape. He had lived intermittently in the Algarve region around the time of Madeleine's disappearance and was reportedly in the area on May 3, 2007. German prosecutors declared they had concrete evidence linking Brueckner to the case, although they admitted it was not yet sufficient to charge him. Media interest reignited overnight, with headlines again splashing Madeleine's name across the globe. But while the announcement was dramatic, the public, and the McCanns, had learned to be cautious. Years of false hope had taught them not to mistake movement for progress. Meanwhile, the broader cultural impact of the case deepened. In 2019, Netflix released The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann, an 8-part docu-series revisiting the timeline, the investigation's many twists, and the wider implications for media and justice. Though the McCanns declined to participate, citing concerns about sensationalism, the series proved immensely popular, drawing millions of viewers. For some, it was an opportunity to revisit the facts and form a more nuanced understanding. For others, it reignited debates that had never truly ended. What made Madeleine's case so unique wasn't just the tragedy itself, but the way it reflected and amplified our collective fears, biases, and digital instincts. The story played out at the intersection of technology, tabloid culture, and true crime obsession. It became a template for how the internet could swarm around a mystery, create its own facts, and give rise to thousands of amateur sleuths. Blogs dissected body language. Reddit threads mapped timelines down to the minute. YouTube creators built careers on clickbait theories. In many ways, Madeleine's story marked the beginning of a new era in public participation and distortion of high-profile cases. At the center of all of this were two parents who had become as scrutinized as the crime itself. The McCanns wrote books, gave interviews, and remained steadfast in their insistence that Madeleine was alive. In a world that had, at times, been unspeakably cruel to them, they remained committed to one central truth: their daughter deserved to be found. Their resilience, even in the face of online harassment, libel, and suspicion, became part of the narrative itself. Whether you believed every aspect of their story or not, it was impossible to deny their enduring resolve. Today, over 17 years since that fateful night in Portugal, the name Madeleine McCann still evokes an immediate, visceral reaction. The case remains officially unsolved. Operation Grange continues its work with a skeleton team. German prosecutors insist that they are building a solid case against Christian Brueckner. But the reality is that no one knows, definitively, what happened to Madeleine. The timeline is still full of shadows. The investigation is still littered with contradictions. And the public's imagination is still captivated by what has become, for better or worse, the defining missing person case of the 21st century. In many ways, Madeleine's story has become more than the sum of its facts. It is a mirror reflecting how we respond to tragedy, how we consume information, and how we judge one another. It's a reminder of how quickly truth can be overwhelmed by noise, and how hope, even in the darkest circumstances, can remain unshaken. For all the headlines, theories, documentaries, and official statements, one simple fact endures: a child disappeared, and she has never been found. That absence continues to echo, across time, across borders, and across a media landscape forever changed by her story. And until an answer emerges, if one ever does, Madeleine McCann will remain both a symbol of unspeakable loss and a case that refuses to close.